You followed her recipe exactly. Same ingredients, same measurements, same pan, but it never tasted right. Black grandmothers cooked with something that couldn't be written down. Hands that knew, timing that felt, and secrets they never fully revealed. Here are 60 dishes that died with the women who perfected them. Potato soup with onions and milk was the meal that could fix almost anything. When the cupboards were nearly bare and payday was still far away, this humble soup stood like a quiet hero. A few potatoes, an onion, and a bit of milk were all it took to fill stomachs and calm worries. The smell of onions sizzling in butter or bacon grease drifted through the kitchen, wrapping the room in comfort. Potatoes were peeled and chopped, dropped into a bubbling pot of water, and left to soften until the broth turned cloudy and fragrant. A splash of milk turned it silky, while salt and pepper gave it life. Some added a spoonful of flour to thicken it. Others tossed in a scrap of leftover ham or a pat of butter for richness. It was simple, cheap, and perfect, made not to impress, but to sustain. Grandparents called it poor man's cream soup, yet no one felt poor eating it. It was warm, filling, and tasted like kindness itself. Around the table, spoons clinked against bowls, laughter echoed between bites, and for a moment, the world outside felt manageable. Potato soup was more than food. It was faith in a pot, made from little but meaning everything.
Neck bones and rice anchored family reunion tables with rich, soul-satisfying presents that cost almost nothing to prepare. Women bought these bony cuts for pennies, knowing that hours of slow simmering would transform them into tender meat swimming in silky gravy. The bones released their marrow into the cooking liquid, creating a broth so rich it seemed impossible from such humble beginnings. Seasoned with onion, garlic, bay leaves, and black pepper, the pot bubbled away while cousins played and elders swapped stories. Served over mounds of fluffy white rice, each plate stretched the budget while filling bellies completely. The rice absorbed every drop of flavorful liquid, turning simple grains into something extraordinary. Neck bones and rice proved that the cheapest cuts, handled with patience, could become the most anticipated dish. Chicken salad finger sandwiches were the elegant centerpiece of many 1960s African-American wedding receptions, transforming humble ingredients into something celebratory. Church mothers stretched a single boiled chicken across dozens of sandwiches by finely chopping the meat and mixing it with mayonnaise, celery, and pickle relish. The mixture was spread onto soft white bread with crusts trimmed away, then cut into triangles guests could eat in a few bites. Arranged on borrowed platters covered with paper doilies, these sandwiches looked far more expensive than they were. The chicken salad had to be creamy but not wet, seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes lemon. Women guarded their proportions closely. For many families, these sandwiches represented the bridge between everyday cooking and special occasion elegance. Red rice with smoked sausage was the kind of dish that announced itself the moment you walked through the door, its tomato-rich aroma filling every corner of the kitchen. African-American mothers learned this recipe from gulagishi traditions, where rice was king and nothing went to waste. Long grain rice was sautéed with onions, bell peppers, and garlic, then simmered in crushed tomatoes seasoned with paprika and cayenne. Sliced smoked sausage was stirred in during the final minutes, its rendered fat adding richness to every grain. The dish was economical and filling, stretching a single link of sausage across a pot that fed 6 children. Served straight from the cast iron skillet, this rice carried the warmth of Sunday afternoons. Children scraped their bowls clean, hoping for seconds before siblings could claim them. Buttermilk overnight soak was the foundation that separated amateur fried chicken from the real thing. Chicken pieces were submerged in thick buttermilk mixed with salt and sometimes hot sauce, then covered and left in the icebox overnight. The acid in buttermilk broke down tough muscle fibers, while salt penetrated deep into the meat. The result was chicken that stayed tender and juicy even after high heat frying. Some grandmothers added a beaten egg to help coat and stick better, while others swore by soaking for 2 full days. The soak seasoned meat from within, meaning every bite carried flavor instead of just the crust. Children never witnessed this step because it happened late at night, making the final product seem like pure kitchen magic. Fried fatback was the foundation of flavor in African American kitchens, rendering golden lard while creating crispy slices that seasoned greens, beans, and everything in between. Grandmothers sliced thick pieces from salted pork back and fried them slowly in cast iron until the fat melted and edges turned golden brown. The rendered fat was saved in coffee cans, becoming the essential cooking medium for countless dishes. The crispy pieces were eaten as a side, crumbled over vegetables, or enjoyed with cornbread between meals. For families with limited money, fatback provided both seasoning and substance from one affordable cut. Children grew up with the sound of sizzling pork-filling morning kitchens. This technique represented resourcefulness, turning one ingredient into both flavor and fuel.
Cabbage and sausage skillet was the kind of dinner that turned struggle into satisfaction. A single head of cabbage, cheap and sturdy, could feed a whole family when paired with a few slices of sausage or hot dogs. Grandmothers fried the sausage first, letting the grease flavor the pan, then tossed in ribbons of cabbage that sizzled and softened. The sound of it frying was enough to make mouths water, a tune of thrift and triumph. The smell filled the house, smoky, savory, and sweet all at once. Potatoes or onions sometimes joined the mix, stretching it further while adding depth. Served hot from the skillet, it was hearty and humble, with each bite carrying flavor far greater than its cost. This meal didn't come from plenty, it came from wisdom, from knowing how to make something out of nearly nothing. Families ate together, full and grateful, proving that good food didn't need much, only love, heat, and a little time.
Watermelon rind pickles were a testament to the waste-nothing philosophy that defined African American cooking. After the sweet red flesh was eaten during hot reunion afternoons, the white and green rinds were saved and transformed into sweet, tangy pickles. Women soaked the rinds overnight in salt water to firm them, then simmered them in a syrup of vinegar, sugar, cinnamon, and cloves until translucent. The process took patience but cost nothing, since the rinds were kitchen scraps given new life. These pickles provided welcome contrast to heavy reunion foods, their sweet acidity cutting through plates of meat and gravy. Children often wrinkled their noses at first, but grew to love the unexpected sweetness hiding in those pale slices. Watermelon rind pickles represented the genius of turning would-be garbage into treasured food. Cheese straws appeared on nearly every wedding reception table in the 1960s South, their golden twisted shapes adding elegance and flavor to the spread. Made from sharp cheddar, flour, butter, and cayenne pepper, these crispy treats were labor-intensive but worth every minute. Women grated cheese by hand, worked the dough smooth, then pressed it through cookie presses or rolled and cut it into strips. The straws baked until golden and slightly puffed, filling kitchens with an irresistible aroma of cheese and spice. They were packed carefully in tins lined with wax paper. At receptions, guests reached for them repeatedly, savoring the combination of sharp cheese and gentle heat. Too much butter made them greasy, while too little left them dry, so skill mattered greatly. They symbolized the dedication that went into every celebration. Rice and gravy was the ultimate weeknight rescue, a dish that turned leftover pan drippings into liquid gold poured over fluffy white rice. Black mothers knew nothing should be wasted after frying pork chops or chicken, so they added flour to the pan and stirred until browned. Milk or water was whisked in slowly, creating thick, savory gravy that bubbled while the rice steamed nearby. The combination was simple but satisfying, offering protein-rich flavor without requiring another piece of meat. Children loved how the gravy soaked into each grain, turning plain rice into something rich and comforting. This dish represented the resourcefulness of African American kitchens, where flavor was built from what others might discard. It was frugal cooking at its finest, proving that ingenuity mattered more than expensive ingredients. Lard render frying was how grandmothers achieved that impossibly golden crust with flavor vegetable oil could never match. The lard came from rendering pork fat saved from previous meals, strained clean and stored in jars until frying day arrived. Grandmothers heated lard slowly in heavy cast iron, testing temperature by dropping flour bits and watching how they bubbled. This fat created a crust that shattered on first bite while keeping meat perfectly moist inside. It added subtle richness that modern oils simply cannot replicate. Families who raised their own hogs had the freshest lard, but store-bought versions still outperformed anything else. The used lard was strained after frying and saved for the next batch, building layers of seasoned flavor over time. Ham hock and turnip greens carried tradition in every slow-simmered pot, filling homes with smoky aroma that signaled Sunday dinner was near. Grandmothers washed turnip greens several times to remove grit, then added them to pots with smoked ham hocks, onions, and a splash of vinegar. The greens simmered for hours until silky and tender, absorbing the rich, salty essence of the pork. The potlikker left behind was liquid gold, sipped from cups or sopped with cornbread to capture every drop. Ham hocks were affordable cuts that butchers sold cheaply, perfect for stretching meals across large families. The meat fell off the bone by cooking's end, offering protein alongside vegetables in one nourishing pot. This dish taught children that patience and humble ingredients created meals worth waiting for.
Cornbread and beans was the supper of survivors, the backbone of countless working families who knew how to turn little into plenty. The beans simmered low and slow, soaking up every bit of flavor from scraps of onion, bacon, or a precious ham bone saved from Sunday dinner. The longer they cooked, the richer they became, filling the home with a deep, savory scent that promised satisfaction. Cornbread baked nearby, its golden crust rising in the oven, the smell of butter and cornmeal mixing perfectly with the aroma of beans on the stove. When dinner was ready, families gathered close, crumbling the cornbread right into their bowls to soak up the thick broth. It wasn't just filling, it was fulfilling, warming both the body and the spirit. Some families added vinegar, others sprinkled sugar, but every household had its way of making it just right. Cornbread and beans told a story of endurance and community, of hard hands and full hearts. It wasn't luxury, it was life, steady and sustaining, passed from one generation to the next as a lesson in gratitude and grace. It reminded everyone that love, like good beans, only grows stronger the longer it's tended.
Pig feet were among the most economical cuts at any butcher shop, and African American cooks transformed them into silky delicacies that drew lines at reunion tables. The feet were scrubbed clean and simmered for hours with vinegar, bay leaves, onions, and hot peppers until the meat fell from the bones. Some families served them hot from the pot with white rice to soak up that rich, unctuous broth. Others pickled them in spiced vinegar, serving them cold as a tangy appetizer that older relatives treasured. The collagen created a texture unlike any other meat, sticky, tender, and deeply satisfying to those who grew up eating them. Children sometimes hesitated at their appearance, but elders ate them proudly, passing down appreciation for these humble cuts. Pig feet proved that the parts others discarded became celebration food. Church pound cake was the wedding dessert that needed no frosting because its buttery richness required no embellishment. Named for the traditional ratio of 1 pound each of butter, sugar, eggs, and flour, this dense golden cake became the foundation of countless 1960s wedding tables. Church mothers baked them in loaf pans or bundt molds, the batter beaten by hand until light and smooth. The secret was in the mixing, creaming butter and sugar until pale, adding eggs one at a time, folding flour gently. Fresh from the oven, the cake developed a thin crust, giving way to tender crumb inside. Some added vanilla or almond extract, others buttermilk for tang. Sliced thick on platters, pound cake satisfied without overwhelming. It was affordable, reliable, and always welcome. Tomato rice carried the bright tang of canned tomatoes mixed into fluffy grains, a dish that children either loved immediately or grew to crave. Mothers would saute onions in bacon grease until soft, then add canned tomatoes and let them break down into a fragrant sauce. Rice was stirred in and cooked slowly, absorbing every drop of that tangy, sweet liquid until each grain turned a beautiful sunset orange. Some families added sugar to balance acidity, while others preferred natural sharpness that cut through heavier dishes. It was often served alongside fried fish or pork chops, but children happily ate bowls of it alone. Tomato rice was inexpensive, using pantry staples that cost pennies but delivered comfort worth far more. This dish taught children that simple ingredients created memorable meals. Cast iron seasoned skillet technique meant the pan itself contributed flavor built up over decades of use. Grandmothers never washed these skillets with soap. They wiped them clean, heated them dry, and rubbed them with oil to maintain the black coating. The seasoned surface created natural non-stick properties that let chicken release perfectly without tearing the crust. Heat distributed evenly across the heavy bottom, eliminating hot spots that could burn some pieces while undercooking others. Some grandmothers used the same cast iron their own grandmothers had cooked in, making each piece a connection to generations past. The pan's weight kept oil temperature stable when cold chicken was added, preventing the soggy crust that came from temperature drops. Crackling cornbread brought crunch and richness to the table by folding crispy pork cracklings directly into the batter before baking. Grandmothers rendered fatback until golden and crisp, then chopped those cracklings into small pieces that studded the cornmeal mixture. The batter was poured into a smoking hot cast iron skillet greased with lard, creating that signature crispy bottom crust. Each bite delivered earthy cornmeal sweetness, interrupted by salty, crunchy pork that melted slightly from the oven's heat. This bread stretched precious meat scraps into something that made plain beans feel like a feast. Children fought over corner pieces where cracklings concentrated and edges turned extra crispy. The bread kept well for days, improving as pork fat continued seasoning the crumb.
Creamed peas on toast was the quiet triumph of the thrifty kitchen, where love turned scarcity into satisfaction. When meat ran out, mothers reached for canned peas, butter, and a little flour to make magic happen. The butter melted into the pan, bubbling with the promise of warmth, and a spoonful of flour thickened it into a creamy roux. A splash of milk turned everything smooth and velvety, coating each green pea in a blanket of comfort. The toast, simple white bread browned on a pan or in the oven, waited like a canvas for the sauce to spill across it. The smell was gentle, buttery, and sweet, the kind that made a house feel like home. It was a meal made in minutes but remembered for years. Families sat together at small tables, passing plates with gratitude and quiet joy. It was humble, yes, but never empty. It fed both hunger and hope. Creamed peas on toast was more than a supper. It was a reminder that gentleness in cooking could make even the hardest days feel soft again.
Butter beans and ham hocks represented the marriage of garden vegetables and meat counter scraps that defined reunion cooking. Large pots of pale green lima beans simmered all morning with smoked ham hocks, the bones releasing their smoky essence into the creamy legumes. Women started the pot before sunrise, letting the beans slowly break down until some dissolved into the broth while others held their shape. The ham hocks yielded precious scraps of tender meat shredded back into the pot before serving. Children loved scooping the soft beans onto their plates, mashing them into the silky liquid. One ham hock costing mere pennies could flavor an entire pot feeding 30 people. Butter beans and ham hocks carry memories of grandmothers stirring pots and aunties tasting for seasoning, showing abundance came from patience. Red fruit punch flowed freely at every 1960s African-American wedding reception, its bright color symbolizing celebration in communities where red drinks carried deep cultural significance. The punch was mixed in large bowls or borrowed fountains, combining fruit juices with ginger ale for sparkle. Recipes varied, but often included Hawaiian punch, cranberry juice, pineapple juice, and sherbet that floated on top, melting into creamy swirls. The drink had to be cold, chilled with ice rings frozen the night before to avoid diluting flavor. Young cousins were assigned punch duty, keeping cups filled throughout the reception. The color mattered as much as taste, that distinctive red connecting celebration to traditions stretching back generations. A cup of red punch meant welcome and festivity. Hoppin' John rice was more than food in African-American households. It was tradition, luck, and heritage served in a single pot. Black-eyed peas simmered with ham hocks or bacon until tender, their cooking liquid becoming a rich, smoky broth. Rice was added directly to the pot, absorbing those flavors as it cooked until each grain was infused with the essence of pork and pepper. Mothers made this dish on New Year's Day for prosperity, but children begged for it year-round because the taste was simply irresistible. The peas were believed to represent coins, bringing fortune to those who ate them, but the real treasure was the flavor itself. Served with cornbread on the side, this was a complete meal that cost almost nothing to prepare. Hoppin' John connected generations, carrying recipes passed down through oral tradition. Double dredge coating method created the thick, craggy crust that made church fried chicken legendary among congregations everywhere. After soaking in buttermilk, each piece was dredged in seasoned flour, dipped back into buttermilk, then dredged again before hitting hot oil. This double coating built layers that fried into ridges and peaks of golden crunch that shattered beautifully. Grandmothers worked quickly to prevent coating from becoming gummy, keeping one hand dry for flour and one wet for buttermilk throughout the entire process. The technique required practice. Too light a touch and coating fell off, too heavy and it became dense and chewy. Some added cornstarch for extra crispiness, while others insisted pure flour was the only proper way. Smothered neck bones transformed an overlooked cut into rich, gravy-laden comfort that warmed souls on cold evenings. Grandmothers seasoned pork or beef neck bones with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, then browned them until deeply caramelized. Sliced onions and bell peppers were added, cooking down until soft before liquid was poured in to create the smothering gravy. The covered pot simmered low for hours until meat became fall off the bone, tender, and gravy thickened to velvet. Served over rice or with cornbread for sopping, this dish turned a cut most ignored into something deeply satisfying. Neck bones, cost almost nothing at the butcher, perfect for feeding large families on tight budgets. The marrow released during cooking added richness that expensive cuts could never match.
Fried bologna steaks were the working family's luxury, served with pride and no apology. Bologna came cheap and lasted long, and when sliced thick and fried in a hot skillet, it became something better than anyone expected. The edges curled and browned as they sizzled, crisping in their own salty fat until the kitchen filled with the smell of smoky comfort. Some families added onions, letting them caramelize right alongside, while others poured milk and flour into the pan to make a rich gravy from the drippings. Served over mashed potatoes or tucked into a sandwich, fried bologna was more than food. It was resourcefulness turned into tradition. Kids loved its crisp edges. Parents loved that it stretched $1 and still filled every belly. For families who worked hard and had little to spare, this meal was both dignity and delight. Every bite was a reminder that care and creativity could turn the simplest things into something worth remembering. Fried bologna wasn't a compromise. It was proof that pride could be pan-fried and served hot, one slice at a time.
Skillet cornbread arrived at family reunions still warm from cast iron, its golden crust crackling as it was cut into thick wedges. Families made cornbread from stone-ground cornmeal mixed with buttermilk, eggs, and bacon grease that gave each bite its richness. The batter was poured into skillets preheated with fat, creating that signature crispy bottom everyone fought over. Some families preferred cornbread, slightly sweet, while others insisted on savory versions that paired better with beans and greens. The cornbread served multiple purposes. It was bread, side dish, and utensil for sopping up potlikker from collard greens. Children grabbed squares to eat while running through yards, leaving crumb trails behind. Cornbread cost almost nothing to make, yet grounded the entire meal. No reunion table was complete without several skillets. Ham biscuits were the savory anchor of 1960s wedding receptions, small enough to eat standing, yet satisfying enough to sustain guests through hours of celebration. Country ham, sliced paper thin and fried briefly to bring out its salty richness, was tucked inside tender buttermilk biscuits made fresh that morning. The biscuits had to be flaky and soft, split while warm, and spread with butter before receiving the ham. Some families added mustard or honey for sweetness that balanced the salt. These were assembled by dozens in church kitchens, wrapped in cloth to keep warm, then arranged on platters before guests arrived. Ham biscuits require coordination between cooks, one team handling biscuits while another managed the ham. They proved that modest budgets could produce food that made people feel truly loved and welcomed. Butter rice with fried eggs was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, depending on what the family needed and what the pantry held. Mothers would cook rice until fluffy, then stir in generous amounts of butter until each grain glistened and carried that rich, creamy flavor. A fried egg was placed. On top is runny yolk breaking open to create a natural sauce that children mixed eagerly into the rice below. Some mothers added a splash of soy sauce or a sprinkle of black pepper for extra depth. This dish was the answer when money was tight but bellies needed filling, providing protein and carbohydrates in one inexpensive bowl. Children loved the ritual of breaking the yolk themselves, watching it flow golden across the butter-slicked grains. It was honest, humble food that required no pretense but delivered complete satisfaction. Church social bird was fried chicken, prepared specifically for after-service gatherings where reputation was at stake. These chickens were selected for uniform size, so every piece cooked evenly, seasoned generously, because food would sit on tables for hours. Grandmothers started Saturday night soaking birds and mixing seasonings, so Sunday morning meant only coating and frying. The chicken was fried darker than usual to stay crispy at room temperature, packed in towel-lined baskets rather than covered containers that trap steam. Every grandmother had competitors at these gatherings, and empty platters told who won. Children learned early that taking from another family's basket was serious violation. This chicken represented a grandmother's entire culinary reputation. Hog-head cheese was a traditional cold cut that grandmothers prepared after hog killings, turning scraps into a sliceable, savory loaf. The hog's head was cleaned thoroughly, then simmered for hours with onions, bay leaves, and vinegar until meat fell away from bone. Grandmothers picked through the cooked meat, adding sage, thyme, black pepper, and crushed red pepper for heat. The meat was packed into loaf pans and covered with reduced cooking liquid, which set into firm gelatin overnight. Sliced thin and served cold on crackers, hog-head cheese offered tangy spice flavor that store versions could never capture. Making it required patience and skill, passed down through generations of women who wasted nothing. This dish connected families to traditions stretching back through slavery and survival.
Egg and potato hash was the meal that turned yesterday's scraps into tonight's feast. It began with leftover boiled or roasted potatoes, chopped into rough cubes and tossed into a skillet slick with grease or butter. The potatoes browned at the edges, crisping beautifully while onions caramelized beside them, adding sweetness and aroma. Then came the eggs, cracked right into the pan, sizzling as they set and pulling everything together. Sometimes a splash of milk or a handful of cheese found its way in, but even plain, it was hearty enough to feed a crowd. The smell of fried onions and eggs filled the air, waking appetites and hearts alike. Families didn't need meat when they had this. It was rich, flavorful, and deeply satisfying. Each forkful carried warmth, care, and the quiet ingenuity of cooks who refused to waste a thing. Egg and potato hash wasn't just a dish, it was a philosophy. It whispered, "Make do, be proud, feed your own." It proved that even the simplest food, made with love, could taste like triumph.
Pickled beets brought vibrant color to reunion tables, their deep magenta hue staining everything they touched while delivering sweet and tangy flavor. Women canned them by the dozen in summer when beets were cheap, creating jewel-toned jars that lasted until reunion season. The beets were boiled tender, sliced thin, and packed into jars with hot vinegar brine, sweetened with sugar and spiced with cloves. Served cold alongside heavy meat dishes, they provided refreshing contrast that cleansed the palate between bites. Children learned early to be careful around the beet table, though purple-stained fingers became badges of reunion participation. The pickling process transformed affordable root vegetables into something elegant. Pickled beets represented forward-thinking preservation, summer's bounty captured in glass to brighten gatherings. Mustard potato salad held a place of honor at 1960s African-American wedding receptions, its tangy yellow color brightening tables alongside other dishes. Unlike mayonnaise-heavy versions, this style relied on prepared yellow mustard for its tang, mixed with chopped hard-boiled eggs, pickled relish, and diced celery and onion. The potatoes were boiled until just tender, never mushy, then cubed while warm so they absorbed the dressing better. Some cooks added sugar to balance the mustard's sharpness, while others preferred bold pucker. The salad was made a day ahead so flavors could meld overnight, then served cold in large bowls. Children often avoided it, preferring sweeter options, but adults returned for seconds. For many families, the potato salad recipe was as precious as the wedding dress, passed down through generations of cooks. Dirty rice earned its name from the ground meat and chicken livers that gave it a speckled, earthy appearance no child could resist. Mothers would brown ground beef or pork with finely chopped livers, onions, celery, and bell peppers until the mixture was deeply savory. Rice was cooked separately, then folded into the meat mixture with Cajun seasonings that brought gentle heat and bold flavor. The dish stretched a small amount of meat across a large pot, making it economical enough for weekly suppers. Children who claimed to hate liver never suspected it was hidden in every delicious bite, and mothers kept that secret with knowing smiles. Dirty rice was Cajun tradition, adopted and adapted by Black families throughout Louisiana and beyond. It proved that the best flavors often came from the humblest ingredients. Bacon drippings, frying added smoky depth that transformed ordinary fried chicken into something unforgettable. Grandmothers saved bacon grease in coffee cans near the stove, collecting drippings from countless breakfasts until enough accumulated. The bacon fat was mixed with lard or oil to raise the smoke point while preserving distinctive flavor. Chicken fried in this blend carries subtle smokiness in every bite without tasting overwhelmingly like bacon. Some grandmothers kept separate cans, one for seasoned drippings used with vegetables, another cleaner batch reserved strictly for chicken. The practice connected breakfast to dinner, waste prevention to flavor creation, stretching expensive cooking fats while adding complexity that pure oil could never achieve. Pickled watermelon rind turned summer's leftover scraps into a tangy, sweet preserve that lasted well into winter months. Grandmothers trimmed the green outer skin and pink flesh, leaving only white rind to be cut into uniform pieces. The rinds were soaked overnight in salted water to firm the texture before being drained thoroughly. A pickling syrup of vinegar, sugar, cinnamon sticks, and cloves was poured over prepared rinds in sterilized jars. After processing, jars were stored in cool cellars where flavors developed. Over several weeks, the result was a crunchy, sweet and sour condiment served alongside meats or eaten as a snack. This preserve represented the waste-nothing philosophy that sustained families through lean times when every scrap carried value and purpose.
Vegetable soup from kitchen scraps was pure genius born from necessity, a pot of everything and nothing all at once. Every peel, every end, every leftover carrot, potato, or onion found its way into the bubbling broth. Grandparents saved the bones from roasts, the wilted greens from salads, even a handful of noodles if there were some left behind. Those scraps met in the pot and became something far greater than the sum of their parts. The broth deepened in color and flavor with every passing hour, carrying the scent of care through the house. It was food that took time, that demanded patience, that rewarded frugality with comfort. The wooden spoon stirred slowly, pulling stories from the pot like memories rising with the steam. Kids waited, bowls in hand, as the kitchen fogged with warmth. Each bite tasted like love stretched thin but never broken. Nothing was wasted, not time, not flavor, not effort. It was a reminder that even small things, when treated with respect, could become something beautiful. Vegetable soup was a testament to endurance, to gratitude, and to the art of making enough out of almost nothing.
Candied yams were among the most anticipated dishes at any African American family reunion, their caramelized sweetness drawing people back for second helpings. Women peeled and sliced the orange flesh, layering it in baking dishes with brown sugar, butter, cinnamon, and nutmeg before baking until syrup bubbled. Some families added orange juice for brightness, while others topped theirs with marshmallows that turned golden under heat. Sweet potatoes were among the cheapest vegetables available, yet this preparation transformed them into something tasting like dessert. Children especially loved them, requesting yams above all other dishes on the reunion table. The scent of cinnamon and butter from the kitchen signaled that serious cooking was underway. Candied yams proved that celebration food didn't require expensive ingredients. Candied yams glistened on 1960s wedding reception tables, their sweet orange surfaces catching the light and drawing guests toward the serving line. Sweet potatoes were peeled, sliced thick, and layered in baking dishes with brown sugar, butter, and spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. As they baked low and slow, the sugar melted into syrup, coating each slice with sticky sweetness. Some cooks added orange juice or pineapple for brightness, while others kept it simple to let the potatoes shine. The dish had to be served warm, its fragrance mixing with other foods to create the distinctive smell of celebration. Candied yams connected wedding tables to holiday traditions, bringing comfort and familiarity. They were affordable yet indulgent, proving that simple ingredients handled with care could produce something extraordinary. Rice pudding for breakfast was a sweet morning treat that turned last night's leftover rice into something children woke up excited to eat. Mothers would warm the rice in a pot with milk, sugar, cinnamon, and a touch of vanilla until it became creamy and fragrant. Some added raisins or a pat of butter, stirring until everything melted together into comfort. The pudding was served warm in bowls, sometimes with an extra drizzle of condensed milk for families who could afford the luxury. Children loved that something as ordinary as leftover rice could be transformed into dessert they were allowed to eat before school. This dish embodied the African American philosophy of wasting nothing and finding joy in reinvention. It was practical magic, turning yesterday's side dish into today's beloved breakfast. Hot sauce, marinade soak was the secret behind chicken that carried heat deep into the meat rather than just on the surface. Chicken sat overnight in buttermilk mixed with generous splashes of Louisiana-style hot sauce, letting vinegar and pepper penetrate every fiber. This produced meat that tingled with warmth from first bite to last, surprising those who expected heat only from the crust. Grandmothers adjusted amounts based on family preferences, making milder batches for children while preparing spicier pieces for adults. The vinegar also tenderized, working alongside buttermilk for impossibly juicy results. Some families used their own pepper sauce from garden-grown peppers. The technique proved seasoning worked best when given time to develop. Molasses pulled candy was a family project that turned simple ingredients into chewy, golden ropes of sweetness shared across generations. Grandmothers boiled molasses with sugar and vinegar until it reached the hard crack stage, testing by dropping bits into cold water. The hot mixture was poured onto grease platters and allowed to cool just enough to handle. Then the pulling began, with buttered hands stretching and folding until candy transformed from dark brown to golden with light texture. Children took turns pulling, arms growing tired, but spirits high as candy changed color before their eyes. The finished ropes were twisted and cut into pieces that stayed chewy for days. Making pulled candy brought families together on winter evenings when entertainment meant creating something sweet from nothing.
Rice and gravy supper was simplicity perfected, the kind of dinner that proved luxury had nothing to do with money. A pot of soft, steaming rice sat waiting while the skillet worked its magic. The gravy began with drippings, saved from fried chicken, pork chops, or even a Sunday roast, scraped and stirred with a wooden spoon until the bits lifted and melted into flavor. Flour and water followed, thickening it just enough to coat the back of a spoon, and then came the pepper, plenty of it. When that golden brown gravy was ladled over rice, it turned humble grains into something rich and deeply comforting. Families gathered around the table, their worries melting away with every bite. It was food that filled more than bellies. It filled the soul with calm. Even without meat, it carried the taste of patience and love, proof that a single pan and a few ingredients could build a feast.
Macaroni salad appeared in giant bowls at family reunions, its creamy coolness providing relief from summer heat and rich barbecued meats. Women boiled pounds of elbow macaroni, then folded it with mayonnaise, mustard, diced celery, onion, and hard-boiled eggs until every noodle was coated. Some families added sweet pickle relish, while others preferred chopped bell peppers for color and crunch. The salad had to rest overnight, allowing flavors to meld and noodles to absorb the creamy coating. Children piled it onto their plates alongside barbecue, appreciating its mild flavor compared to spicier dishes. A few boxes of pasta and pantry condiments could feed an entire reunion crowd economically. Macaroni salad represented the genius of stretching affordable ingredients into crowd-pleasing abundance. Sweet potato pie was often the only dessert rivaling the wedding cake itself, its spiced filling and flaky crust representing generations of baking knowledge. The sweet potatoes were roasted until tender, then mashed smooth with butter, sugar, eggs, and spices, including cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla. The filling was poured into homemade crust and baked until set, the top turning golden and slightly cracked at the edges. Each family had their own recipe, guarded closely and revealed only to daughters deemed worthy of the knowledge. The pies were often made by the bride's mother or grandmother, their presence on the table a stamp of family tradition. Sliced thin to serve more guests, sweet potato pie was eaten alongside wedding cake or instead of it. Its familiar taste carried more meaning than any fancy frosted confection could. Salmon croquettes over rice was Friday supper in countless Black households, a tradition born from Catholic neighbors and adopted for its economy. Canned salmon was mashed with eggs, onions, and crushed crackers, then formed into patties and fried until golden and crispy. These croquettes were placed atop mounds of fluffy white rice, their juices soaking into the grains below. Mothers stretched a single can of salmon into enough patties to feed an entire family, making it one of the most affordable protein sources available. Children loved the crispy exterior, giving way to tender, flavorful fish, especially when hot sauce was passed around the table. The dish connected families to coastal foodways and the resourcefulness of making canned goods. Feel homemade? This was frugal cooking that never tasted cheap. Cornmeal crusted variation created a grittier, more rustic coating that crunched differently than pure flour versions. The dredging mixture combined fine cornmeal with flour in ratios that varied by household, some preferring half and half, others using just a quarter cornmeal. The corn added subtle sweetness and golden color that darkened beautifully during frying, creating a crust with more tooth and texture. This variation was common in rural areas where cornmeal was more affordable than refined wheat flour. The coating held up better for packed lunches and picnics, staying crispy longer without absorbing moisture. Some grandmothers toasted cornmeal before mixing to deepen flavor. The technique connected fried chicken to cornbread, tying together two southern pillars. Pig's feet and rice delivered rich, gelatinous comfort that warmed bellies and stretched budgets further than almost any dish could. Grandmothers cleaned the feet thoroughly, scrubbing between each toe before placing them in large pots with water, onions, and bay leaves. The feet simmered for hours until meat became tender and cooking liquid turned thick with natural gelatin. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and hot sauce, the feet were served over fluffy white rice that soaked up rich, porky gravy. The collagen in pig's feet was believed to strengthen joints and nourish skin, making this both food and folk medicine. Children learn to navigate small bones and appreciate the sticky, satisfying texture that defined this traditional meal. This dish proved that cheapest cuts often delivered deepest, most satisfying flavors.
Homemade fish cakes were the ocean's gift to frugal kitchens and clever cooks. Canned salmon, mackerel, or even tuna became something special when mixed with breadcrumbs, minced onion, and egg. The mixture was formed into patties, pressed firm between flour-dusted palms, and dropped into hot oil where they hissed and crackled. The smell filled the kitchen with a salty promise, the kind that made you feel rich no matter what the bank said. Each patty fried to a perfect golden brown, crisp on the edges and soft inside. Served with a squeeze of lemon or a side of potatoes, they were a complete meal, cheap, filling, and full of pride. The secret was in the seasoning, often passed down from memory. A pinch of salt, a touch of mustard, maybe a shake of pepper. They were proof that good food came from care, not cost. Every bite was a reminder that a clever cook could make the simplest pantry taste like a banquet.
Red velvet cake was the crown jewel of dessert tables at African American family reunions. Its dramatic crimson layers revealed with each slice. Women mixed cocoa, buttermilk, vinegar, and red food coloring into tender batter, then baked it into layers stacked high with tangy cream cheese frosting. The cake's origin was disputed, but its place in Black Southern tradition was undeniable. No reunion was complete without one. The cream cheese frosting provided perfect contrast to the subtle chocolate flavor, while the color made every slice feel like celebration. Grandmothers guarded their recipes carefully, each claiming theirs was the original. Children stared at the towering cakes, knowing they'd wait until after the main meal for their pieces. Red velvet cake represented the understanding that celebration required beauty as well as taste. Banana pudding with meringue crowned many 1960s wedding dessert tables, its golden peaks and creamy layers drawing admiration before the first spoonful was served. The pudding was cooked slowly on the stovetop, eggs and milk and sugar stirred constantly until thick and silky. Vanilla wafers were layered with sliced bananas and pudding in large dishes, each tier soaking into the one below until everything melded together. The meringue was whipped by hand until stiff, spread across the top, and browned under the broiler until peaks formed. Timing mattered. Made close enough to serving that meringue stayed high, but early enough for layers to soften. Women earned reputation based on their banana pudding, with invitations sometimes accepted specifically because a certain cook was providing dessert. It represented patience, skill, and love. Rice and kidney beans was a hearty one-pot meal that filled bellies and stretched budgets further than seemed possible. Dried kidney beans were soaked overnight, then simmered with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and bay leaves until they became creamy and rich. Rice was served alongside or stirred directly into the beans, creating a complete protein that nutritionists would later praise, but mothers already understood. The dish was seasoned with cayenne and thyme, giving it warmth that radiated from the inside out. Children would eat multiple bowls, not realizing they were consuming one of the healthiest and most economical meals their mothers could provide. Louisiana traditions heavily influenced this dish, but it appeared in Black kitchens across the entire South. Rice and kidney beans proved that poverty could never diminish flavor or love. Brown paper bag seasoning technique achieved perfectly coated chicken pieces without making a floury mess across the kitchen. Seasoned flour went into a large grocery bag, then chicken pieces were added a few at a time and the top folded shut before shaking vigorously. The tumbling action coated every surface evenly while keeping flour contained. Children were often recruited for shaking duty, making them feel included while grandmothers tended hot oil. The paper absorbed excess moisture from the chicken's surface, helping flour stick better than coating done on plates. After use, the bag was saved for next frying day, building seasoned flour that carried memory of previous batches. This showed how grandmothers solved practical problems with creativity. Chow chow relish was a colorful vegetable preserve that grandmothers canned at summer's end when gardens overflowed with produce. Green tomatoes, cabbage, onions, and peppers were chopped fine and salted overnight to draw out moisture and develop flavor. The vegetables simmered in a tangy mixture of vinegar, sugar, mustard seed, and turmeric until they softened slightly but retained their crunch. Hot jars were filled and processed in boiling water baths to seal for winter storage. Served alongside beans or greens that needed brightening, chow chow added acid and crunch balancing rich foods perfectly. Making chow chow was a social event, with women gathering to chop, stir, and share stories. This relish represented the art of preservation that kept families fed when fresh vegetables disappeared with frost.
Navy bean and ham bone soup was the meal that turned leftovers into legend, a dish that spoke of slow hours and full hearts. The leftover ham bone from Sunday's meal went into a big pot with dry beans, onions, and water, and from that, magic was born. It simmered for hours until the beans softened and the meat slipped from the bone. The broth turned smoky, thick, and fragrant, filling the air with a scent that could stop conversation mid-sentence. Each spoonful carried history of thrift, care, and kitchens that knew patience by name. Sometimes carrots or celery were added if the garden gave enough. Other times, it was just beans and hope. The soup was ladled into mismatched bowls, steaming and hearty, the kind of meal that made even a cold house feel warm. Every bite tasted like effort made worthwhile, like gratitude turned into nourishment. It was proof that love, when simmered slowly, could feed a family for days.
Fried okra arrived at reunion tables in heaping mounds, each pod transformed from slimy vegetable into crispy golden nuggets that disappeared fast. Women sliced fresh okra into rounds, dredged them in seasoned cornmeal, and fried them in cast iron skillets filled with hot oil. The cornmeal coating turned crunchy while the okra inside became tender without the texture issues that made some people avoid it. Children who claimed to hate okra would devour the fried version, often not realizing what they were eating. The dish stretched garden abundance into celebration food. One bushel could feed dozens when transformed this way. Served hot with plenty of salt, fried okra disappeared almost as fast as it hit the table. Fried okra represented Southern ingenuity at its finest, turning humble vegetables into irresistible bites everyone loved. Tea, cakes appeared at wedding receptions as symbols of continuity, these simple cookies connecting the celebration to generations of family traditions, made from flour, butter, sugar, eggs, and a touch of nutmeg or vanilla. They were mixed by hand and rolled on floured counters. Each cookie was cut round and baked until just set, never browned, producing soft discs that yielded gently to the bite. Tea cakes were not overly sweet, making them perfect alongside punch or coffee without overwhelming the palate. Many brides requested them specifically because their grandmothers had served tea cakes at their own weddings decades before. The recipe varied by family, some adding nutmeg, while others preferred lemon zest. Arranged on platters or packed into tins, tea cakes whispered of heritage and keeping traditions alive. Smothered chicken and rice was Sunday dinner, magic, transforming tough chicken pieces into fork-tender meat swimming in rich onion gravy. Mothers would season chicken legs and thighs generously, brown them in hot oil, then remove them while sliced onions softened in the drippings. The chicken returned to the pot, covered with those caramelized onions and enough water or broth to create steam. Hours of slow cooking later, the meat fell from the bone and the gravy had thickened into something silky and deeply savory. Rice was piled on plates first, then topped with chicken and generous ladles of that precious gravy. Children fought over the pieces, with the most onions clinging to them. This dish was love made visible, requiring time and attention that showed how much mothers cared. Smothered fried chicken transformed already perfect fried pieces into something even more deeply comforting. After initial frying, chicken was placed back in the skillet and covered with rich gravy made from pan drippings, onions, and milk. The lid went on and everything simmered until coating softened and absorbed savory sauce while meat grew even more tender. This was weeknight cooking at its finest, stretching Sunday's fried chicken into Tuesday's dinner with deepening flavors. The gravy-soaked crust became almost dumpling-like, falling apart against the tongue while meat remained distinct. Children often preferred this to fresh fried because sauce made everything easier to eat and taste richer. Grandmothers knew this dish proved good food should never go to waste. Pear preserves captured the honeyed sweetness of late summer in amber jars that brightened winter breakfast for months. Grandmothers gathered ripe pears from backyard trees, peeling and slicing them into heavy pots with sugar and lemon juice. The mixture simmered slowly, stirred often, until pears turned translucent and syrup thickened to coat a spoon. Filled jars were sealed and stored in cellars where they lined shelves like golden treasures. Spread on hot biscuits or swirled into oatmeal, pear preserves delivered concentrated fruit flavor surpassing anything store-bought. Children watched grandmothers test the set by dropping spoonfuls onto cold plates, learning skills that preserved food and tradition. These preserves connected families to land and seasons, reminding them that abundance required preparation to last.
Stuffed bell peppers with rice and tomato sauce were the pride of thrifty kitchens. Mothers would line up bright green peppers on the counter, slicing off the tops and scooping out the seeds with care. A single pound of ground meat, beef if you were lucky, or whatever was on sale, was stretched with rice, onions, and breadcrumbs until it could feed the whole family. The mixture was packed into each pepper, standing tall in a baking dish before being smothered in tomato sauce. As it baked, the scent filled the house with warmth, tangy and savory all at once. The peppers softened, the sauce thickened, and dinner became something that looked fancy even when it cost next to nothing. Families gathered around the table, cutting through the soft vegetables to reveal the hearty filling inside. It was a meal that brought pride, not pity, proof that resourcefulness could taste like celebration. Every bite carried the balance of thrift and love, where nothing went to waste and everything felt like home.
Deviled eggs appeared on every reunion table, their golden yellow filling piped neatly into white halves that disappeared within minutes. Women boiled dozens of eggs the night before, carefully peeling and slicing each one to remove the yolk for mashing. The filling combined yolks with mayonnaise, mustard, pickle juice, and paprika until smooth and tangy. Each half was topped with a sprinkle of paprika for color. Eggs cost almost nothing, yet these transformed versions looked elegant on serving platters lined with lettuce leaves. Children circled the table waiting for permission to grab one, while adults debated whose recipe was superior. Deviled eggs represented the art of making something fancy from humble ingredients. They traveled well and could be made days ahead without losing quality. Stuffed celery sticks lined reception tables like edible decorations, their pale green boats filled with cream cheese, mixtures guests could grab with one hand while greeting the bride. The celery was trimmed and cut into lengths, the natural hollow filled with softened cream cheese mixed with chopped olives, pimentos, or crushed nuts. Some cooks added Worcestershire sauce or paprika for depth. The filled stalks were arranged on platters in neat rows, sometimes garnished with parsley. This was budget-friendly elegance, transforming cheap vegetables into something pretty. Women prepared dozens the night before, covering them with damp cloths to keep them crisp. The crunch of celery against creamy filling provided contrast guests appreciated. Stuffed celery represented the fussiness that made weddings feel special. Fried rice with leftover vegetables was the dish that proved nothing in a Black mother's kitchen ever went to waste. Yesterday's peas, carrots, corn, or green beans found new life when tossed into a hot skillet with day-old rice and a splash of oil. Mothers would scramble eggs directly into the mixture, adding soy sauce or Worcestershire for that savory depth children craved. The rice needed to be cold and slightly dry, which made leftovers perfect for the job. Each grain fried separately, picking up the flavors of whatever vegetables the week had left behind. Children never complained about eating their vegetables when they came disguised in fried rice. This dish taught families that creativity could transform scraps into something everyone requested by name. Seasoned salt secret blend was mixed by hand in small batches and stored in repurposed spice jars. Grandmothers combined regular salt with garlic powder, onion powder, paprika, black pepper, and sometimes cayenne in proportions they never wrote down. The mixture was rubbed generously onto chicken before the buttermilk soak, creating a base layer that penetrated the meat. Each family's blend was slightly different, making their fried chicken recognizable at community gatherings. Some added celery salt or dried herbs, while others kept it simple with just 4 ingredients. The homemade blend cost pennies compared to store-bought, but delivered flavor commercial products could never match. Children learned to make it by watching, carrying the knowledge forward. Chitlin loaf transformed polarizing intestines into something even skeptics could appreciate, baked firm and sliceable like any meatloaf. Grandmothers cleaned chitlins meticulously, boiling them first with vinegar and spices until tender enough to grind fine. The chopped meat was mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, sage, and pepper before being packed into loaf pans and baked. The result was a savory spiced loaf that could be sliced cold for sandwiches or warmed with gravy for supper. This preparation made chitlins approachable for those who struggle with traditional texture while preserving distinctive flavor. Families served chitlin loaf at holiday gatherings, where aroma announced both tradition and celebration. The dish showed creativity of cooks who found multiple ways to honor every part of the animal.
Shepherd's pie with leftover roast was the definition of reinvention, a masterpiece of thrift and comfort. Yesterday's scraps of meat were chopped fine, mixed with whatever vegetables had survived the week, and bound together with a splash of gravy. Sometimes a bit of leftover bread or oats thickened the filling, soaking up every ounce of flavor. On top went a layer of mashed potatoes, spread smooth with the back of a spoon, then dragged into peaks that browned beautifully in the oven. The smell was a blanket of warmth that wrapped the whole house. It was the kind of meal that could silence a room once served, everyone too busy savoring to speak. Families didn't need a lot to make it right, they just needed care and a cast iron dish. It was food that turned hard times into shared joy, and scarcity into something that tasted abundant. Shepherd's pie was proof that love didn't show itself in grand gestures. It showed up in leftovers turned into miracles.
Potato salad was as essential to reunions as the relatives themselves, with every matriarch claiming her version was definitive. Women boiled pounds of potatoes until just tender, then diced them while still warm so they absorbed the dressing better. The mixture combined mayonnaise, mustard, chopped celery, onion, and hard-boiled eggs with sweet pickle relish, adding brightness. The salad had to rest overnight, allowing flavors to marry into something greater than its parts. Served cold in massive bowls, it provided cool relief alongside smoky barbecued meats. Potatoes were dirt cheap, stretching to feed dozens from just a few pounds. Potato salad proved that simple ingredients handled with care created dishes people requested by name for years. Collard greens, simmered with ham hocks, brought soul and substance to 1960s African-American wedding receptions, their deep green color representing home and heritage. The greens were washed multiple times to remove grit, stripped from stems, and cooked low and slow with smoked ham hocks that flavored every leaf. Onions, garlic, and a splash of vinegar balanced the richness, while a pinch of sugar softened any bitterness. The greens cooked for hours until silky tender, served with cooking liquid spooned over top. Guests ladled portions onto plates alongside other dishes, the familiar taste grounding celebration in everyday comfort. Collards were inexpensive and stretched far, one large batch feeding dozens. This dish connected wedding joy to Sunday dinner tradition, reminding everyone that celebration and home cooking belong together. Rice with neck bones was a dish that required patience, but rewarded families with flavor that expensive cuts could never match. Pork neck bones were seasoned heavily with salt, pepper, and garlic, then browned in a Dutch oven before being covered with water and left to simmer for hours. The meat slowly fell away from the bones, while the cooking liquid became a rich, gelatinous broth that glistened in the light. Rice was cooked in same Potlikker, absorbing every bit of smoky, porky goodness until the grains turned golden and fragrant. Children learned to navigate around the small bones, savoring the tender meat that clung to them. Neck bones cost almost nothing at the butcher, making this dish accessible even during the leanest weeks. It was proof that the best flavors came from parts others overlooked. Honey drizzle finish was applied to hot fried chicken straight from the oil, creating a sweet glaze that set into the crust. The honey was warmed slightly so it poured easily, then drizzled over each piece while steam still rose from the golden coating. The heat partially caramelized the honey, creating sticky sweet spots that contrasted beautifully with the savory, peppery crust beneath. This technique was reserved for special occasions because honey was expensive, but when it appeared, everyone knew the meal was a celebration. Some grandmothers added a pinch of cayenne to the honey for sweet heat that lingered on the lips. Others mixed in a splash of hot sauce for a more complex flavor profile that balanced sweet, salty, and spicy in every bite. The honey finish made ordinary fried chicken feel like a feast. Pepper jelly was a fiery sweet preserve that grandmothers ladled over cream cheese or used to glaze meats with southern flair. Fresh hot peppers from gardens were chopped fine and simmered with sugar, vinegar, and pectin until the mixture reached jewel-like consistency. The jelly ranged from mild to blazing, depending on the cook's preference and peppers available that season. Poured into sterilized jars and processed for storage, pepper jelly kept for months in cool pantries. Served over cream cheese with crackers, it became the appetizer at every church, social, and gathering. Grandmothers brushed it over ham during baking, creating glaze that balanced sweet heat perfectly. This versatile preserve showed how garden peppers could elevate simple foods into something a guest remembered.
Cabbage rolls with ground beef and rice were a triumph of patience, skill, and unshakable hope. One head of cabbage, softened in boiling water, became the vessel for a hearty mix of rice, meat, onions, and spice. Each leaf was filled carefully, folded tight like a promise, and laid in neat rows inside a pot. Tomato sauce was poured over the top, bubbling slowly until everything came together in harmony. The scent alone could feed a soul before the first bite even touched a plate. Every roll told a story of care. A mother's hands working late into the evening, her eyes soft with purpose. The rolls were tender, flavorful, and filling, feeding large families on little more than a pound of meat. Eaten with bread to soak up the sauce, it was a dinner that made the ordinary feel special. Cabbage rolls were patience served hot, a lesson that time and love could make even the simplest food unforgettable.
Collard greens simmered in massive pots at every African-American family reunion, their earthy aroma announcing serious cooking was happening. Women washed the leaves repeatedly to remove grit, then stripped them from tough stems and sliced them into ribbons. The greens cooked for hours with smoked ham hocks or turkey necks, absorbing smoky flavor while becoming silky tender. Vinegar, hot sauce, and sugar balanced the natural bitterness into something complex. The cooking liquid, Potlikker, was treasured as much as the greens, sopped up with cornbread by those who knew. Collards were cheap and abundant, especially from backyard gardens. Elders believed the greens brought good fortune when eaten at gatherings. Collard greens represented the wisdom of slow cooking, transforming tough leaves into tender celebration food. Fried chicken wings piled high on platters were the finger food that disappeared fastest at 1960s wedding receptions, their crispy coating and tender meat satisfying guests of all ages. Wings were the cheapest part of the chicken, often sold in bulk at prices whole birds could not match. Seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, then dredged in flour and fried in cast iron until golden, the wings emerged crackling hot and deeply flavorful. They could be eaten without utensils, perfect for guests mingling through reception lines. Church mothers fried batches in home kitchens, timing the cooking so wings arrived warm. The bones made them easier to handle, and children especially loved grabbing them from platters. Wings represented practical generosity, providing protein to crowds without straining budgets. Shrimp and rice stretched a coastal bounty into meals that fed entire families on what others might consider a single serving. When shrimp was affordable or caught fresh from nearby waters, mothers would saute them with onions, garlic, and bell peppers until pink and fragrant. The shrimp were nestled atop beds of seasoned rice, their juices mingling with the grains below. Some mothers made a tomato-based sauce, while others kept it simple with butter and Cajun spices. Children felt fancy eating shrimp, not realizing their mothers had made a pound stretch across 6 plates. This dish connected African-American families to Gula traditions and the abundant seafood of southern coastlines. It was celebration food that didn't require a celebration to appear on the table. Pressure cooker fried chicken was the weeknight secret that delivered tender meat in half the time of traditional methods. Grandmothers who worked outside the home relied on heavy aluminum pressure cookers that could fry chicken in under 20 minutes. The chicken was coated and placed in hot oil inside the sealed cooker, where steam and pressure worked together to cook meat through while the exterior crisped. The result was impossibly juicy chicken with a crust that stayed crispy longer than conventional versions. This method required confidence because the equipment was dangerous if mishandled, but experienced cooks moved with practiced ease. The pressure cooker allowed dinner to reach the table before children finished homework, proving good fried chicken did not require hours over hot oil. Fried corn captured late summer sweetness in a buttery, caramelized skillet dish that tasted nothing like boiled corn on the cob. Grandmothers cut kernels from fresh ears, then scraped cobs with knife backs to release milky liquid that thickened the dish naturally. The corn was fried slowly in bacon drippings with sugar, salt, and pepper until edges began to caramelize and milk reduced to creamy sauce. Some added onions or bell peppers, while others kept it pure to showcase corn's natural sweetness. This dish appeared at Sunday dinners when gardens produced more corn than families could eat fresh. Children loved its sweetness, while adults appreciated how it transformed a common vegetable into something memorable. Fried corn taught that technique mattered as much as ingredients.
Goulash with elbow macaroni was the working family's secret to stretching a little into a lot. A single pot could feed everyone, bringing together canned tomatoes, noodles, and bits of ground beef or sausage in a dance of flavor and practicality. The sauce thickened as it cooked, coating every curve of macaroni in tangy, savory richness. The bubbling sound was as familiar as laughter, filling the kitchen with life. It was food for long days when the world felt heavy, but the promise of dinner made it lighter. Some added a dash of hot sauce or a spoon of sugar. Every cook had their own rhythm. No two pots of goulash ever tasted exactly the same, but they all carried the same message. You are cared for. Served with bread or nothing at all, it was the meal that proved comfort didn't come from wealth, but from togetherness. Goulash was the smell of home, the flavor of love dressed in tomato and noodles.
Black-eyed peas held special significance at African American gatherings, carrying traditions of luck and prosperity from generations past. Women soaked dried peas overnight, then simmered them slowly with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and bay leaves until creamy. The peas absorbed smoky pork flavor while releasing starch to thicken the cooking liquid into silky gravy. Some families added tomatoes or hot peppers for depth, while others kept seasonings simple. Served over rice or alongside cornbread, black-eyed peas stretched to feed entire families for almost nothing. Children learned that eating them brought blessings, making even reluctant young eaters clean their plates. The peas connected reunion tables to African and Southern traditions surviving through centuries. Black-eyed peas proved meaningful foods came from affordable ingredients. Cold macaroni salad appeared at nearly every 1960s wedding reception, its creamy dressing and tender pasta providing familiar comfort alongside fancier dishes. The macaroni was boiled until soft, then cooled and mixed with mayonnaise, diced celery, chopped onion, and sometimes hard-boiled eggs or pickle relish. Some cooks added bell peppers for color or mustard for tang. The salad was made a day ahead so flavors could meld, served cold in large bowls that stayed on tables throughout the reception. Unlike hot dishes requiring warming trays, macaroni salad was forgiving, staying safe, and tasty for hours. The ingredients were pantry staples that cost little and one batch stretched far. Guests often returned for second helpings. Macaroni salad was the reliable workhorse of wedding buffets, never glamorous but always appreciated. Rice and butter beans carried the creamy sweetness that made children ask for seconds without being told to finish their vegetables. Lima beans, called butter beans throughout the South, were simmered until they turned soft and almost melted on the tongue. Ham hocks or bacon added smokiness to the cooking liquid, which became a velvety broth perfect for spooning over rice. The combination was filling and nutritious, stretching a small amount of meat into a complete meal. Children who claimed to hate beans often loved butter beans because of their mild, almost sweet flavor. Mothers knew this dish would disappear from the pot before the night was over. It represented the quiet genius of Southern cooking, where humble ingredients became something everyone craved. Pickle juice, brine, was the unexpected tenderizing secret borrowed from pickle jars that would otherwise be discarded. Chicken pieces were soaked in the leftover brine from finished pickle jars, letting the vinegar, salt, and spices work overnight. The acid tenderized tough cuts while infusing subtle tang that made the finished chicken taste brighter and more complex. This technique cost nothing extra since the brine was already paid for with the pickles. Some grandmothers mixed pickle juice with buttermilk for a hybrid soak that combined the best of both methods. The finished chicken carried just a whisper of pickle flavor, not enough to taste like pickles, but enough to make people ask what made it so good. The method showed how grandmothers found value in ingredients others considered waste, turning scraps into culinary secrets. Oxtail gravy turned bony tail sections into the richest, most velvety sauce that ever graced a plate of rice or mashed potatoes. Grandmothers browned oxtails in heavy pots until deeply caramelized, then added onions, garlic, and tomato paste for depth. The meat braised for hours in stock until it surrendered to the bone and cooking liquid reduced to silky mahogany gravy. Collagen released from bones created body that flour-thickened gravies could never match. This dish stretched expensive seeming richness from cuts that cost almost nothing because shoppers overlooked them. Served over starches that soaked up every drop, oxtail gravy made weeknight suppers feel like celebrations. The meat was eaten with fingers, every bit of flavor sucked from bones before they were discarded.
Fried cornmeal mush was the golden child of thrift, turning yesterday's leftovers into today's satisfaction. After breakfast, leftover cornmeal porridge was poured into a loaf pan, cooled until firm, and sliced thick the next day. Each slice sizzled in a skillet with butter or bacon grease, crisping at the edges while staying soft and tender inside. The smell of corn and salt hung in the air, calling everyone to the table. Served with syrup for sweetness or gravy for heartiness, it was food that could adapt to any need. Poor families knew that nothing in the kitchen should ever go to waste, and fried mush made sure of it. The sound of it cooking was as comforting as its taste, steady, warm, and familiar. Every bite carried the quiet triumph of resourcefulness, proof that with a little creativity, even scraps could shine. It was food born from hard times but remembered for its joy.
Pound cake arrived at reunions wrapped in foil or displayed on glass stands, its dense golden crumb promising rich satisfaction. The traditional recipe called for a pound each of butter, sugar, eggs, and flour. Simple ingredients transformed through patient creaming and careful baking. Women beat the batter until light and fluffy, then poured it into greased tube pans to bake low and slow. The result was dense yet tender, with fine crumb tasting of pure butter and vanilla. Pound cake needed no frosting, though some served it with fresh berries or powdered sugar. It kept well for days and improved as flavors mellowed. Slices appeared at breakfast, lunch, and midnight snacks throughout reunion weekends. Pound cake represented mastery of basics, proving technique mattered more than expensive ingredients. 7-Up cake was the modern marvel of 1960s wedding dessert tables, its light texture and subtle citrus flavor coming from fizzy soda stirred right into the batter. The recipe called for a box of lemon cake mix, vanilla pudding, eggs, oil, and a full bottle of 7-Up that made the cake rise high and stay impossibly moist. Baked in bundt pans, the cake emerged golden and tender, often glazed with powdered sugar and lemon juice that dripped down the ridges. Brides loved it because the recipe was nearly foolproof, producing consistent results even for nervous cooks. The soda was cheap, the mix affordable, and results impressed guests who asked for the recipe. 7-Up cake represented the optimism of the era, embracing convenience products to create something celebratory. It showed tradition and innovation could share the same spread. Oxtail, Rice was the dish that transformed what butchers once gave away into a delicacy children would remember forever. Oxtails were browned until caramelized, then braised for hours with onions, garlic, thyme, and allspice until the meat surrendered from the bone. The cooking liquid reduced into a rich, sticky gravy that clung to every surface it touched. Rice was served as the foundation, soaking up that precious sauce while tender pieces of oxtail were arranged on top. The dish required time that working mothers didn't always have, making it special occasion food in many households. Children learned patience, waiting for oxtails, understanding that the best things couldn't be rushed. This was comfort food elevated to art through nothing but time and care. Self-rising flour coating created a lighter, slightly puffier crust that some families preferred over dense traditional versions. The leavening already mixed into the flour caused tiny air pockets to form during frying, resulting in coating that felt almost tempura-like in its delicacy. Grandmothers who used this method often added less seasoning because self-rising flour already contained salt. The coating fried faster and absorbed less oil, making the finished chicken feel lighter. This variation was particularly popular in regions where self-rising flour dominated pantries. The lighter crust let chicken's natural flavor come through more clearly, appealing to those who found traditional coatings too thick. Some families kept both methods in rotation, using self-rising flour for everyday meals and double dredge for occasions. Black-eyed pea patties transformed yesterday's pot of peas into crispy, protein-rich cakes that rivaled any meat dish for satisfaction. Grandmothers mashed cooked black-eyed peas with onions, egg, cornmeal, and seasonings before shaping the mixture into flat rounds. The patties were fried in hot oil until golden and crusty on both sides, while staying creamy inside. Served with hot sauce, chow chow, or alongside greens and cornbread, they made complete meals from humble leftovers. This dish proved legumes could anchor a plate just as well as pork or beef when prepared with care. Children often preferred these crispy cakes to the original pot of peas they came from. Black-eyed pea patties represented resourcefulness that turned one meal into two without sacrifice.
Boiled potatoes with butter and parsley were the definition of humble comfort, a meal that carried both simplicity and grace. They showed up on tables during lean times when money was scarce, yet hearts were full. Potatoes were scrubbed clean, quartered, and dropped into a pot of salted water to boil until tender enough for a fork to slide through. When drained, they glistened with steam, waiting for that golden touch of butter to melt across their surface. The parsley, freshly chopped or dried from the pantry, wasn't just garnish. It was a gesture of care, a bit of color that made the meal feel special. Some families poured a splash of milk into the pot for creaminess, others browned the butter for deeper flavor. No matter how it was done, the result was the same, a dish that satisfied both hunger and heart. The smell alone could quiet a noisy house, reminding everyone that even the plainest ingredients could feel like home. Boiled potatoes with butter and parsley weren't extravagant, but they were proof that comfort could be found in the simplest acts of cooking, where love was the main ingredient.
Peach cobbler bubbled in cast iron skillets at reunions, its golden crust giving way to spiced fruit tasting like summer captured in a dish. Women sliced fresh peaches when in season or used canned ones year-round, layering them with sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg. The topping varied. Some spooned biscuit dough over fruit, while others poured batter underneath and let it rise around peaches. As it baked, the kitchen filled with intoxicating sweetness, drawing everyone closer. Served warm with vanilla ice cream melting into the juices, peach cobbler ended meals on notes of pure contentment. Peaches were cheap and abundant during summer, making this dessert economical in large quantities. Elders passed down specific ratios as treasured family secrets. Peach cobbler proved that honest ingredients needed nothing fancy. Fruit cocktail cake stretched a single can of fruit into dessert for dozens, its dense crumb studded with colorful bits of peaches, pears, and cherries. The recipe was simple, mixing flour, sugar, eggs, and baking soda with an entire can of fruit cocktail, including the syrup. The liquid kept the cake moist while sugars caramelized slightly during baking. Some versions were topped with coconut or brown sugar streusel before going into the oven. The cake was baked in sheet pans for easy cutting, producing squares guests could eat without forks. Canned fruit cocktail was pantry stable and affordable, making this cake accessible to families on tight budgets. The jewel-toned fruit peeking from each slice added color to dessert tables. This was practical celebration baking at its finest, proving resourcefulness and sweetness went hand in hand. Time. Pepper steak over rice brought a touch of the exotic to Black dinner tables, adapting Chinese restaurant flavors to home kitchens. Inexpensive beef was sliced thin against the grain, then stir-fried with bell peppers, onions, and tomatoes in a hot skillet. Soy sauce and a little sugar created a glossy sauce that coated everything in savory sweetness. The mixture was spooned over mounds of steaming white rice, the grains catching every drop of that flavorful liquid. Children who had never been to a Chinese restaurant thought their mothers had invented something entirely new. The dish stretched a small amount of beef across multiple plates, making it economical despite feeling special. It proved that Black mothers could master any cuisine and make it their own. Garlic clove rub involved crushing fresh garlic and rubbing it directly onto chicken pieces before any other seasoning was applied. The raw garlic released oils that penetrated the skin and meat, creating depth of flavor that powdered garlic could never achieve. Grandmothers used the side of a knife to smash cloves, then pressed the paste into every crevice of the chicken with their fingers. The garlic mellowed during frying, losing its sharp bite while leaving behind rich, savory undertones. This extra step took time that busy cooks often skipped, but those who practiced it knew the difference was worth the effort. The technique connected fried chicken to other garlic-forward dishes in the Southern repertoire. Some grandmothers added the smashed garlic directly to the buttermilk soak, infusing the entire marinade with its essence. Sorghum syrup biscuits were a breakfast tradition that predated maple syrup and corn syrup in Southern pantries by generations. Grandmothers baked tall, flaky biscuits from flour, lard, and buttermilk, splitting them hot to receive thick drizzles of dark sorghum. The syrup's complex sweetness carried notes of molasses and caramel that refined sugars could never replicate. Children loved the sticky mess it made, licking fingers and chasing pools of syrup with biscuit pieces until plates were clean. Sorghum was often made locally from tall cane stalks, pressed at community mills each autumn. The syrup kept indefinitely without refrigeration, making it practical as well as delicious. This simple breakfast connected families to agricultural traditions that supermarkets have largely replaced.
Chicken and dumplings from scratch were the crown jewel of kitchen wisdom, the kind of meal that stretched one bird into something grand. The chicken simmered slow in a big pot of water, bones and all, until the broth turned cloudy with richness. Onions, celery, and carrots added depth, transforming the air into a promise of warmth. Then came the dumplings, rolled thin or dropped by spoon, depending on family tradition. They puffed and floated in the bubbling broth, tender and soft as memories themselves. The kitchen filled with steam and quiet anticipation as the meal came together. Every bowl was an act of love, hearty enough to chase away hunger and weariness alike. Leftovers were rare, but when they existed, they tasted even better the next day. This dish wasn't just food, it was connection, the kind that bound families through hard years and cold winters. Chicken and dumplings taught that patience and care could turn scarcity into abundance, and every bite carried that lesson forward.
Chitlins appeared at reunions for adventurous eaters, their distinctive aroma announcing their presence long before hitting the table. Women spent hours cleaning pig intestines, scrubbing and rinsing them repeatedly until ready for cooking. The chitlins simmered with onions, vinegar, bay leaves, and hot peppers until tender enough to cut with a fork. Some families fried them crispy after boiling, while others served them soft in cooking liquid. The flavor was intense and unmistakable, earthy, rich, and tied to traditions of using every part of the animal. Children often avoided them, but elders ate them proudly as connection to heritage. Chitlins cost almost nothing since they were parts others discarded, yet required skill and patience to prepare properly. This dish represented transformation of necessity into cherished tradition. Ons, smothered oxtails, brought slow-cooked luxury to 1960s wedding receptions, transforming an inexpensive cut into something guests remembered long after the celebration ended. The oxtails were browned in batches, then simmered for hours in rich gravy made from onions, garlic, tomatoes, and beef broth until meat fell from bones. The collagen melted into the sauce, creating silky richness without expensive ingredients. Seasoned with thyme, bay leaves, and black pepper, the dish filled church halls with an aroma, drawing guests toward the serving line. Oxtails were cheap because most shoppers overlooked them, but African American cooks knew their value. Each piece was meaty enough to satisfy, and gravy stretched the dish over rice. Smothered oxtails represented the alchemy of patience and knowledge, turning what others dismissed into a feast. Crackling crumble, coating incorporated crushed pork cracklings into the flour dredge for extra richness and texture. The cracklings were pounded fine with a rolling pin or the bottom of a heavy pan, then mixed with seasoned flour before coating. This addition brought smoky pork flavor and an extra layer of crunch that regular flour could not provide. The technique used cracklings left over from rendering lard, ensuring nothing from the pig went to waste. The coating fried darker than plain flour and developed an almost bacon-like quality that made people reach for second helpings. Grandmothers who kept their own hogs had steady supplies of cracklings, while others saved them from occasional lard purchases. The method was rich beyond measure, but reserved for times when indulgence was deserved and celebrated. Stewed tomatoes and okra was a summer garden dish that simmered two Southern favorites into silky, comforting spoonfuls. Grandmothers chopped ripe tomatoes and sliced fresh okra, cooking them slowly with onions, salt, and sometimes sugar to balance acidity. The okra released natural thickening properties, binding tomatoes into stew-like consistency without flour or cornstarch. Some versions included corn kernels, expanding the dish to use whatever the garden produced in abundance. Served over rice or with cornbread for sopping, this dish made vegetables the star rather than an afterthought. The flavors deepened when reheated the next day, making it practical for busy households. Stewed tomatoes and okra proved meatless meals could satisfy when made with fresh ingredients.
Homemade vegetable pot pie was the story of thrift wrapped in a crust, the kind of dinner that made ordinary ingredients feel like a celebration. Leftover vegetables, peas, corn, carrots, potatoes, were gathered into a pot, mixed with thickened broth and butter to form a creamy filling. The crust was rolled by hand, patched if needed, and laid lovingly across the top before being brushed with milk for shine. As it baked, the scent of pastry and herbs filled the home, wrapping the room in comfort. When the knife cut through that golden crust, steam rose like a sigh, carrying the fragrance of care. Every bite was soft, savory, and familiar, the essence of home-cooked love. It was a meal that stretched what little you had into something that felt complete, something that made the family sit closer and linger longer. Vegetable pot pie was more than sustenance. It was the art of making do, elevated to something tender and unforgettable.
Hog maw separated reunion guests into those who grew up eating it and those who couldn't get past its origins. The pig stomach was cleaned thoroughly, stuffed with seasoned sausage, potatoes, and cabbage, then roasted until everything melded into savory richness. Women prepared it the day before, letting it cool so flavors set before slicing into thick rounds. The texture was chewy and satisfying, the filling spilling out in aromatic layers, mixing on the plate. Some families simmered hog maw in broth instead of roasting, creating heartier, stew-like dishes. Either way, it stretched expensive sausage with cheap vegetables into meals feeding many. Elders who remembered lean times appreciated every bite for what it represented. Hog maw proved resourcefulness, created dishes worth passing down. Peach cobbler bubbled in deep pans at 1960s wedding receptions, its golden crust and sweet fruit filling offering warm comfort to guests celebrating love. The filling was made from canned peaches when fresh were out of season, their syrup mixed with sugar and cinnamon before being topped with biscuit dough or batter that rose during baking. The crust turned golden while the fruit softened and caramelized at the edges. Served warm with vanilla ice cream alongside, the cobbler satisfied without competing with the wedding cake. Canned peaches were affordable year-round, making this dessert accessible regardless of wedding date. Church mothers made cobblers in home ovens, transporting them carefully to reception halls. The dish connected celebration to everyday Southern tradition, its homemade quality telling guests they were fed with care. Rice with fried fish and hot sauce was Saturday supper that brought the whole family to the kitchen before the cooking was even done. Whiting, croaker, or catfish was seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, then dredged in cornmeal and fried until the coating crackled. The fish was placed directly on beds of white rice, where the crust stayed crispy while the juices flavored the grains beneath. Hot sauce was passed around the table, each family member adding their preferred amount of heat. This dish cost almost nothing when fish was caught rather than bought, making it a staple in communities near rivers and coastlines. Children grew up associating the smell of frying fish with weekend freedom. It was simple food that carried the taste of home. Pan drippings gravy started the moment fried chicken was lifted from the skillet, turning the leftover oil into liquid gold. Grandmothers poured off most of the frying oil but left the browned bits and a few tablespoons of fat in the pan. Flour was sprinkled in and stirred until it formed a paste that cooked until golden. Then milk was added slowly while stirring constantly. The gravy bubbled and thickened, picking up all the seasoned flavor from the chicken coating that had fallen into the oil. This gravy was poured over biscuits, rice, or the chicken itself, extending one dish into a complete meal. Nothing was wasted. The same pan that fried dinner became the vessel for its sauce. Children learned that good cooking meant seeing possibilities in what others might discard. Fried salt pork with cream gravy was morning sustenance that powered field workers through long hours before the noon meal. Grandmothers sliced salt-cured pork thin, soaked it briefly to temper the salt, then fried slices until crispy and golden. The rendered fat became the base for cream gravy made with flour and milk, seasoned heavily with black pepper. Crispy pork and rich gravy were served over split biscuits or alongside fried eggs for a complete breakfast. Salt pork was cheaper than bacon and kept longer without refrigeration, making it practical for families without modern conveniences. This dish provided fat and protein needed for physical labor in fields, factories, and homes. Simple ingredients prepared with skill could fuel hard work and long days.
Hot water cornbread and collard greens were the Southern anthem of resilience. Cornmeal mixed with boiling water, stirred thick, and patted into cakes before hitting the hot grease, sizzling like applause. The crust turned golden and crisp, the inside soft and steaming. In another pot, collard greens simmered for hours with onions, a dash of vinegar, and the smoky whisper of salt pork or ham hock. The two dishes belonged together, one soaking up the juices of the other, both telling stories of survival. This was food born from the earth, from hands that planted and harvested, cooked and endured. The smell of greens filled the home with warmth and history, reminding families that struggle and celebration often shared the same table. Every bite carried a balance of bitterness and comfort, a harmony only time could create. Hot water cornbread and collard greens weren't just Southern staples. They were living traditions, proof that faith and flavor could rise from even the hardest soil.
Bread pudding turned stale loaves into dessert, rivaling any fancy bakery creation at family reunions. Women tore day-old bread into chunks, soaking them in sweetened milk and eggs, seasoned with vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg. Raisins were folded through before baking until golden and slightly puffed, the edges caramelizing against the pan. The center stayed custardy, while the top formed a delicate crust, crackling with each spoonful. Some families drizzled bourbon sauce over warm slices, while others preferred it plain. Bread pudding represented the genius of waste-nothing cooking, transforming would-be garbage into something people requested specifically. It could be made in massive batches economically using bread that cost nothing. This dessert taught every generation that creativity mattered more than cost. Homemade butter mints sat in small dishes at every 1960s wedding reception, their pastel colors and creamy sweetness providing the finishing touch to celebration meals. Made from butter, powdered sugar, and peppermint extract, the mixture was kneaded until smooth, then shaped into small rounds or pressed through molds. The mints were tinted pink, green, or yellow with food coloring to match wedding decorations, each delicate enough to melt on the tongue. Women made them days in advance, storing them between wax paper and cool places. The mints cost almost nothing to produce, but looked elegant in crystal dishes borrowed for the occasion. Guests took them after eating, peppermint freshening breath while sweetness lingered. Making butter mints was a skill passed between generations, young brides learning from mothers and aunts. Crowder peas and rice was a dish that Southern children either loved from the first bite or learned to appreciate with time. These small brownish peas were simmered slowly with fatback or ham hocks until they released the natural starch and created a thick pot liquor. The liquid turned almost creamy, coating each pea in silky richness that rice absorbed eagerly. Mothers seasoned the pot with onions, garlic, and black pepper, letting flavors meld during the long cooking process. Unlike black-eyed peas, Crowder peas had an earthier, more robust flavor that stood up to heavy seasoning. Children who grew up eating them developed a taste for this unique variety. The dish represented agricultural traditions passed down through generations of Black Southern farmers. Egg wash enrichment added beaten eggs to the buttermilk soak, creating a thicker coating that adhered better and fried richer. The eggs provided protein that helped flour stick while adding richness to the final crust. Some grandmothers beat the eggs separately and dipped chicken after the buttermilk soak, but before flouring, creating distinct layers. Others mixed eggs directly into the buttermilk for a simpler one-step process. The egg wash also helped coating develop deeper golden color during frying, making the chicken look as good as it tasted. This technique required slightly more ingredients, but delivered results that impressed guests and won compliments at gatherings. The added richness made each piece feel more substantial, turning ordinary meals into occasions worth remembering. Persimmon pudding was an autumn dessert that captured the honey sweetness of fully ripe wild persimmons in dense, spiced cakes. Grandmothers gathered persimmons only after frost softened them, knowing unripe fruit would pucker mouths with unbearable astringency. The pulp was pressed through colanders, then mixed with flour, eggs, milk, sugar, and spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. The batter baked into pudding-like cakes that were dense, moist, and intensely flavored with concentrated fruit. Served warm with cream or cold the next morning, persimmon pudding was a seasonal treasure that appeared briefly each year. Children learned to recognize ripe persimmons by their soft appearance and sweet fragrance. This dessert connected families to wild foods and seasonal rhythms.
Spam and fried potatoes were the meal of working families who knew how to make the best of what they had. The can hissed open with a promise of salt and survival, the pink slices laid into a skillet where they browned and curled at the edges. The smell was unmistakable, savory, smoky, and satisfying. Potatoes followed, diced and fried in the leftover grease until golden and crisp, soaking up every ounce of flavor. The result was a plate that felt both hearty and homely, feeding everyone without fuss or waste. It was food that asked for nothing fancy, just a frying pan, a bit of oil, and the will to make it work. For many, it was the taste of wartime resilience and post-war routine, a dish that stayed on tables long after ration books were gone. Spam and potatoes were proof that love didn't need luxury. It just needed warmth, effort, and the shared joy of a hot meal after a long day.
Sweet tea flowed endlessly at African American family reunions, its amber liquid served in tall glasses clinking with ice. Women brewed massive batches by steeping tea bags in boiling water, then stirring in sugar while still hot so it dissolved completely. The sweetness level varied by family. Some made it almost syrupy, while others preferred lighter sweetness, letting the tea shine. Gallons waited in refrigerators and coolers, refilled constantly as relatives came back for more. Sweet tea cost almost nothing to make, yet provided refreshment no store-bought drink could match. Children ran back to the drink table between games, gulping it down before racing off again. Adults sipped slowly on shaded porches, glasses sweating in summer heat. Sweet tea was more than beverage. It was the liquid thread connecting every reunion memory. Salted mixed nuts filled small bowls scattered across 1960s wedding reception tables, their crunch and savory flavor balancing the abundance of sweet dishes. The nuts were bought in bulk, a mixture of peanuts, cashews, almonds, and sometimes Brazil nuts that provided protein and satisfaction between courses. Roasted and salted, they were simple yet essential, giving guests something to nibble while waiting in lines or making conversation. The bowls were placed near punch stations and at corners of food tables where people gathered. Nuts were affordable when purchased in quantities and required no preparation beyond pouring into dishes. Their presence showed attention to detail, understanding that receptions needed variety. Guests reached for them throughout the evening, the familiar tastes grounding celebrations in everyday pleasure. Rice with stewed tomatoes and okra brought together two beloved garden staples into one pot of pure Southern comfort that tasted like summer itself. Fresh okra was sliced and sautéed until the slippery texture mellowed, then combined with canned or fresh tomatoes and simmered until thick and fragrant. The mixture was served over fluffy rice, the grains soaking up the tangy, slightly sweet sauce, while okra added body and satisfying texture. Some mothers added shrimp or sausage when budgets allowed, transforming it into a heartier meal that could stretch even further. Children learned to love okra through this dish, its unusual texture hidden beneath the familiar comfort of tomatoes and seasoned rice. It was summer in a bowl when gardens overflowed with abundance. This recipe connected families to the land that sustained them. Time ones.
Which dish could you never replicate? Share your grandmother's mystery recipe in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more flavors we're still chasing.